Welcome. Thanks for joining us for our maiden episode of our new series, Steve and Dave's Rock Art. In this series, we'll be exploring the artwork that drew our collective attention to musical masterpieces. Although, to be fair, the graphic art was often superior to the music. But we'll be looking at everything from the poster artists who announced love-ins in San Francisco to the album cover art designers who provide a feast for our eyes while we're enjoying the smorgasbord for our ears. If you're here for the pretty pictures, you may not be familiar with our YouTube channel, so allow us to introduce ourselves briefly before we jump into it.
Yeah, hey, I'm Steve, and Dave and I have been passionate about music for 50 years. And what we do is to talk about our passion, our interest, frankly, our love for popular music and the events that took place decades ago. And what we're really excited about today is to think more about the art that drew us into this great music.
Right. I'm Dave, and like Steve said, the concept of this is that we're going to be looking at the sort of albums back in the day with you had LPs, you had wonderful fold-out albums, and you could be reading about stuff. You had these fantastic pictures, illustrations. You had all sorts of extras. This is what we're going to be talking about. Now, Steve and I met back, it's been almost, well, right around 40 years
Right.
now. And that was back in college. We were in the same dorm together. And I kept discovering Rolling Stone magazine in the lobby of the dorm. And the subscription label was for Steve. And so I thought, wow, that's just a great contribution to dorm community. And so when I actually put the face together with the name, that was kind of the basis for me to know this was a kindred soul.
And my introduction to Dave was that you were the guy that left these bags of these delicious crunchy bits, cinnamon and sugar, and it was like Santa Claus. There would just be this gigantic bag of these things sitting in the dorm. And so once I met,
what were those even called? Crustos or something like that?
Something like that, yeah. But once we
Taco Tico.
Once we met, we knew that it was we were kindred souls, I guess. And so we've been thinking about these kinds of issues, talking about music forever. And so it's our great joy to be able to do this with you all here.
Right. And today we're going to be talking about, one of the premier album design agencies.
Yeah.
Some of the most iconic album covers in rock history were made by this group. And we're actually going to dedicate a couple of our episodes to Hipgnosis, which is the name of the agency that was founded by Storm Thorgerson and Aubrey Powell back in 1968, and went on, as I said, to produce album covers that everybody recognizes, even my kids recognize these album covers, although they don't know the music behind it. So in addition to talking about Hipgnosis, we're going to dedicate this episode to the specifically the Hipgnosis album covers that were designed for Pink Floyd.
Right.
Because the career of Hipgnosis and Pink Floyd was very symbiotic, ran parallel, and they affected each other's careers in numerous ways. So it's almost impossible to think about Pink Floyd without also thinking about Hipgnosis, and vice versa.
I think that's right. I mean, I think the linkage between Hipgnosis and Pink Floyd was profound. I mean, they both, I think, they fed off each other, they elevated each other. I think there's no question that you can't think about one without the other. And it's so fascinating that Hipgnosis, in a way, sort of helped to create kind of a kind of brand for Pink Floyd. I mean, the Floyd was famously a kind of faceless band, and as much as anything, the images from their albums that became kind of their trademark, and it became almost a kind of code for fans. So Hipgnosis and Pink Floyd, they're extraordinarily important, and they work together.
Yeah, absolutely. And that goes back to well, first of all, just a little bit about the origin of the ad agency, or sorry, the graphic agency.
Yeah.
Hypnosis was formed when Storm Thorgerson and Aubrey Powell were students together at the Royal College of Art. In fact, they used the college's darkroom
Yeah.
to develop a lot of their first shoots. They had a brief interval there where they were developing their film in Aubrey's bathroom, which had been converted to a dark room.
Right.
And then they went on they moved to 6 Denmark Street, which is located in Soho, West End, London. And the Tin Pan Alley of London.
That's right.
All music companies and so on are located right on that street. In fact, the Sex Pistols made some of their demos at that very address.
Yeah. It is the case that in this era, late 60s, London is obviously an enormous place, but it's also a very small place. And creatively, it seemed as though the people who were sort of at the crest of the wave all seemed to know each other. And so the neighborhood, Dave, you're describing, this is where you find the publishers, this is where you find clubs, this is where you find really important offices. And seemingly everybody, well, almost everybody knew everyone. It's just really quite extraordinary, the kind of interlinkages.
Yeah. Elton John and Bernie Taupin were writing their first songs on that street. David Bowie was there, et cetera, et cetera. So it really, there was a lot going on, and there was a lot of personal interaction
That's
back
exactly right.
at that point in London on that street. So it was a good place for them to be. They came up with a name for the agency when they found it as literally found it as graffiti on the door to their apartment. Thorgerson said they liked it not only as a pun with hypnosis and then hypnosis, but for its, quote, nice sense of contradiction, of an impossible coexistence from hip for new, cool, and groovy, and Gnostic related to ancient learning, end quote. So that's that. That's where that came from, and it's just become a name that is impossible to forget when you're talking about rock albums.
Well, that's exactly right. And doesn't it seem as though that is the perfect name for that era as well? There is in this era, there's a certain sense of inquiry. There's also a certain kind of, I don't know, always a certain kind of overstatement. And so there's just, these things all come together with this particular moniker. And so really from that point, then they sort of launch into this brand new world, a world that frankly, they kind of create. It is the case, right, that there had been LPs for decades, but the notion of a kind of distinctive album cover, that was still relatively new.
It was relatively new. You're thinking 1968. Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band came out the year before.
Yeah.
And Powell said that was an eye opener for them. Oh wow, this is something something else is possible for album covers. They used to be, well, Sgt. Pepper's was also, in a sense, a portrait of the band. You had all the band members on the cover,
right.
but my God, what else was on the cover? And that had been kind of the standard. You have an album cover, you put the band on it so people see who's playing or who's supposed to be playing.
Yeah.
And slap a title on it, and that's it. There was very, very little thought or consideration or any artistic design involved in the process.
I think that's right. I think, and leave it to the Beatles to be innovators. They pushed the boundaries in all sorts of areas, but I think it's fair to say that in the '60s, Beatles album covers stood out, whether it was a Revolver with the Klaus Forman drawing, or of course Magical Mystery Tour, what you're talking about there with Sergeant Pepper.
Or even Rubber Soul, which
Rubber
was
Soul.
a
That's
portrait
right.
of the band, but it was certainly a very unusual portrait.
And with Sergeant Pepper, for example, people, they studied the cover, they interpreted the cover, people gave it a deep reading. There was a certain kind of, maybe a kind of mysticism involved with the cover. Maybe there was a certain kind of insight into the band by looking at the cover. And so it took the album cover to a whole new place. And this is all happening. Powell and Torgerson are just soaking this in, and they're ready to sort of launch into this new world.
And it's worth mentioning that the first album cover that they did was a Saucerful of Secrets for Pink Floyd.
Yeah.
There had been a personal connection there far previous to any work that they did together professionally.
That's right.
Thorgerson went to the Cambridgeshire High School for Boys with Sid Barrett, who was in a class below him, and Roger Waters, who was 1 year higher. He played rugby in the school team with Waters. Thorgerson's and Waters' mothers were good friends.
Yeah.
And even with David Gilmour, they had also been teenage friends and friends, as far as I can see, for their entire lives. And Thorgerson went on to do Pink Floyd albums essentially for Gilmour after Waters left the group. And was man in his wedding in 1994. So
that's right.
The connection there was very, very strong, and that led to the their first project.
Well, this is the thing, Saucer Secrets, and we can look at this here. The Saucerful Secrets again is this is the debut of Floyd, and it is in its own way, quite a departure from sort of music of the era. It is it's very challenging music. The Floyd at this time, they were considered very much a kind of I think a kind of experimental band, right? That their light shows were as noteworthy as the music they were playing on the stage. And so
the light shows, yes, were a very important element, and also played into another thing. They were being understood and marketed as a psychedelic rock.
Psychedelic, yeah, exactly
right. And that was the time of psychedelic music, and the light shows were, of course, something that were designed to heighten the psychedelic experience.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so the Floyd, they were really innovators in this regard, and it was the case that the key members of Floyd at this time, Barrett and Gilmour, again had this relationship with Torgerson, and that again, when Barrett famously sort of dropped out of the group and replaced by Gilmour, there still was this kind of great relationship there. And so, it's a fascinating thing that Torgerson is so involved with the creative engine of Floyd, really from the very beginning, really throughout the entire career of Floyd. Torgerson is right there. But I think that, you look at an album cover like this, and it's, it is very much of the era, but it also, I think, is a kind of emblem as a very kind of different act. That you've heard of the Floyd, check this out. And it's like, yeah, there we go. This isn't a promotional photo, right? This is something challenging, much like their music.
Well, and this is only the second album cover that EMI put out and allowed to be done by an outside agency. Right. It was all in-house up until then.
Sure.
And again, that had a lot to do with Pink Floyd just insisting, these are our guys, this is what we want. And so it happened. And it was something that record companies were going to have to get used to,
Yeah, that's
because it
exactly right.
certainly had not been the way of doing business up until then.
No, that's exactly right. I think this is to some degree, right. The advent of this kind of distinctive album cover is also then at the same time that artists are sort of laying claim to their own kind of artistic identity, kind of breaking away from the kind of production mold or the production line mold of various kinds of record companies. EMI, a very famous record company, but a very old school record company, was, being really forced to change on the fly. And the Floyd was, a group that was really, at the forefront of all this. It's interesting that, right, that this album is really the only album that Barrett has a lot of influence. He has some songs on the next album, but he drifts away pretty quickly.
Well, yeah, Saucerful of Secrets was
Yeah,
actually the last album that he did any writing for.
yeah,
And he had been very, very influenced. Um, Pink Floyd's first studio album, "The Piper at the Gates of Dawn," was essentially Syd Barrett's baby. But his deterioration, which almost certainly accelerated by heavy LSD use, but his mental deterioration took place very quickly after that.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's one of the famous, tragedies in rock music. But it's just worth noting that Syd Barrett, who was again a dynamic creative force in the earliest days of Floyd, wasn't there very long. And so once Gilmour enters the group changes a bit, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Songwriting changes a bit, musicality changes quite a bit.
And
Yeah.
Gilmour and Barrett had actually known each other. They had played
Oh, yeah.
together in various milieus. But this is the only time that they play together on a Pink Floyd album.
That's right. It, it's the Barrett story is a tragic one, but the I think the vibe within the group was a positive one because, as you say, Gilmour and Barrett knew each other. In fact, Gilmour produced Syd Barrett's solo album, Madcap Laughs, and I think that transition, while painful, was not maybe as awkward as it seems, but the group changes pretty dramatically. And I think the album covers change as well a little bit, maybe a little bit.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We'll see more of that. Just real briefly to this
Yeah, go
album.
ahead.
Part of this album cover was taken from a cover. No, it's not. I'm sorry, not a cover, but a panel from Marvel's Strange Tales, number 158, which is a Doctor Strange story.
Yeah.
It was illustrated by Marie Severin. And if you're familiar with it, you can see it in the cover. But that's actually, I think, probably the most salient and important point about this particular album.
Yeah, the Doctor Strange link. We'll put some some things in the reading list, and also connected to this, so you can explore this on your own. But there is a pretty interesting kind of backstory between the Floyd and Doctor Strange that continues actually for quite a long time. But yeah, there we go.
Yeah, the next album is actually a soundtrack for the movie More. Now, if you're familiar at all with like Easy Rider, you kind of get a sense of the sort of movies that were being made in the underground scene back in the day, 1968, 67, 68, 69. And they're road movies. They're about people experimenting with drugs, doing heavy drug use, freaking out with drugs. And that's essentially all that More is about. It's just about a guy who has some experiences with strangers, on the road and at somebody's place and is on drugs. Anyway, because of Pink Floyd's psychedelic reputation,
Mhm.
were tapped to do this soundtrack, and Hipgnosis did the cover of the Pink Floyd soundtrack.
Yeah, I would.
Well,
I think it's fair to say that the what lives on from this particular artistic endeavor is not really the movie, but maybe the soundtrack, or at least the album cover. I mean, I think that the film disappeared quite quickly. I mean, it's a it's a kind of it's an interesting kind of time capsule from this era, as you're saying that films were really pushing boundaries and exploring these kinds of issues, drug-related issues, and drug-related exploration. But I think more in terms of the soundtrack, it has legs that the film never had.
right, and here we. This is just a scene from the movie, and it's it's lit as a negative, and that's also supposed to provide some sort of psychedelic effect, make it look a bit like a psychedelic trip. And that's basically this. This is a windmill in Ibiza.
Yeah.
So
And here
that's that. You know,
and if, yeah, and if
pretty
you
much all
and
that
if
needs to be said about it.
that's it, then here's the backside of the LP, a little bit more conventional, if you will.
Yeah. Okay, so that's that, and also a Hypnosis cover for Pink.
That's right.
The next on our list is Umaguma, which is considerably more interesting for my thinking than either of the previous album jackets.
I agree. Now, this is one of the most interesting. I think this is. We'll take a look at it here. One of the most interesting album covers, I think, of all time. It's one of those that oftentimes makes the list of the 50 most influential album covers. This kind of thing. I remember being baffled by this record. Though this is the first Floyd record that I had. I actually got it from a friend, and I remember listening to it and listening to it and listening to it again. And I can confess I didn't really get it. It was a difficult album to sort of enter Floyd with. So, but the album cover is just it's mesmerizing.
Yeah, it's the Drasta effect, right?
That's right.
With a picture of the picture inside the picture. So this meta ebene going theoretically to eternity.
That's
So
right. That's right.
a very interesting effect. They did a little twist on that, of course. If you look at it carefully, you see that in each picture, the band members change positions. Who is sitting where,
Right.
who's standing, etc. So, interestingly, there's an album, a soundtrack for Gigi
Gigi Leslie.
there.
Yes.
Yes, and that was not included on the American cover, presumably because of
Oh,
problems. They didn't want to do.
likely
So,
so. For
if you
sure.
bought the album in America, your Uma Guma jacket probably does not have that.
That brings up I think an interesting point, Dave, about album covers in this era, because there were American releases and then there were European releases, and the album covers, as you're suggesting here, were oftentimes different, sometimes quite different, sometimes only subtly different. But real aficionados then of a particular band would want LPs, from both places, right? But you'd want the European release because you had to have that. You'd had to have the Umaguma with Gigi on it. This was, there was a certain obsessiveness to the album design and to people who kind of coveted albums. And when you had a group like Floyd releasing a fair number of LPs, and when the LPs would be slightly different parts of the world, people craved all of that. And so something like the cover of Gigi is something that made a difference to Floyd fans.
Yeah, yeah. Um, anyway, for me, the first truly interesting Hipgnosis jacket for Pink Floyd.
I agree. Yeah, me too. Yeah, for sure.
Okay, next on the list is Atom Heart Mother, which is also historical in rock music publishing. Why is that, Steve? Why is this cover just a breakout from everything that came before?
It must be the first cover that featured a Jersey cow. No, I don't. You
I
got
don't.
me.
That may be true. That
Beats
may
the
be
hell
true. I'm
out of
not
me.
sure.
I don't know.
But this the album cover had not only no pictures of the band, there was no writing at all. Not a
Right.
title,
That's right.
not the band name, nothing. It was simply this photograph. And the record company went ape. They did not want this cover.
So
And
that's right. Oh, that's right.
right, well, because everything that, at least in conventional wisdom, sells an album was missing.
Well,
Would
that's right.
look at this album and would have no idea what it was about. In fact, the advertising is the same way. A huge poster on a billboard with a cow. You don't even know that it's about music. You don't even know it's about an album. And to Pink Floyd's great credit, they insisted on it. And if they hadn't, it would not have become the pioneer that it did become.
You know,
Uh,
yeah.
Really a classic because it breaks all the rules.
It does break all the rules, and it is a classic in that regard. It's again a tough listen. We're not here necessarily to criticize Pink Floyd, but if Adam Hart Mother makes Guma like I don't know what. It's a very tough listen. You know, in later pressings in the United States, this when it was in the shrink wrap, there was a big sticker on this album, Pink Floyd's Adam Hart Mother, and later, of course, Pink Floyd from Wish You Were Here, Dark Side of the Moon. That record company tried to kind of try to alert people that this was actually a Pink Floyd album. But you're right, famously, there was nothing on it, and so this, I think, cemented Floyd's reputation as this kind of faceless artistic creation, and also, I think, famously cemented the reputation as an iconic classic band. Kind of, frankly, a kind of pain in the ass to the establishment. Certainly, a pain to the record company, because at this point, Pink Floyd hadn't sold that many albums.
No.
We think about Pink Floyd today as this kind of behemoth, but in the early 1970s, they were in this avant-garde, kind of tiny group with a kind of devoted but extraordinarily small fan base. And so this kind of thing, probably drove record executives to distraction, because who the hell do they think they are? They don't sell anything. But that would change.
Well, it just makes me wonder how they managed it. Because I would think if I had been a record executive back in the day, I would have just said, listen, boys, you start selling some albums and we can talk about what kind of covers you put on it. Until then, you let us do our thing, and maybe we'll actually sell some albums. You're not going to sell any albums if nobody knows that you're putting them out. And this cover certainly does not tell anyone that.
I have to say that,
But it's, you said before, Steve, is that sometimes you just see an album cover and you want to have that album sound unheard. You don't know what it is, but the album cover says, yes, this is something I want to have. And I think that's an effect that this cover had, because it was so unusual.
I only
the people just bought it and said, let's see what's in it. you know.
My only pushback would be that I think people bought this album. It'd be interesting to sort of track this, but I think people bought this album after release of Dark Side, after release of Wish You Were Here. I mean, I think this album, its sales probably soared in the mid to late 70s as people tried to then fill in their back catalog of Floyd. But I bet, when this thing was, when it's released in the early 1970s, I'm not certain that this is the kind of album cover that would just draw the average listener in. I definitely remember seeing this in record stores, and just not really being able to decipher it. And but I think you're right. It did show that the Floyd had this certain kind of integrity, but also real quickly, God bless the record company executives who let them do this, because you can imagine the frustration was at a boiling point with this group because they didn't play the game. They didn't release singles. They didn't do publicity. They were just they were a pain. And I imagine Roger Waters in particular was extraordinarily difficult to deal with. But there we go. They continued to record. Adam Hartmuther.
Well, one thing about it is they did have a very loyal following.
They did, no question.
The Pink Floyd fans were huge fans, and even if it wasn't a large gathering, those people would know. Hey, look for the album with the cow. That's the new album.
And this goes.
They would seek it out. They would find it, and other people might just pick it up out of curiosity. So I think in some ways, challenging the conventional wisdom of album packaging might have actually worked for them in this case.
And I can see that. Certainly, this was the era with that kind of thing. There was much more, tolerance for it. I mean, this was considered innovative. I don't think there's any question about it. And so the Floyd became, I think at this point, it's a small audience, but it's a devoted audience. And it's also, I think, clear that Pink Floyd was just a different kind of band. And so each new release with Pink Floyd, there was something there that was unanticipated. And so Adam Hartmuther was, sort of part of that lineage, I suppose.
And one thing about it is the group and Roger Waters said to Hipgnosis, come up with an idea and show us what you've got.
All right.
And they went out and just took some pictures of cows. And
that's right.
Powell said, the old adage is never work with children or animals in the entertainment. But he said, this cow was lovely. Did nothing but stand there and look at us and just like, take a picture of me. There's another picture of 3 cows included in the album. And he thought of that kind of like a jet formation, 3 cows breaking off for a diving mission or something like that.
That's
yeah,
right.
The cows.
The cows. Yeah.
So the next album, Metal, is kind of a return to the more psychedelic, less.
Boy, that it is. We'll take a look here. That it is. It's
yeah.
What are? Oh, this is. I remember this in record stores as well. Later pressings of this album again would have on the shrink wrap would be a big sticker on it, Metal from Pink Floyd, all this. But this is still right. This is still pre-Dark Side, and so this is still, I think, for most people just an unknown band. But here's another funky album cover. Do you recall what specifically this is, Dave? This
well, I'm glad doing the research for this that the description of what this is could be found, because I had no idea, and I still, even after reading the description, I don't see it. But what this is an ear underwater, and
yeah.
The waves in the water are analogous to sound waves, and so this underwater ear is collecting waves of sound.
Yeah.
Thorgerson, I think, to his credit, wanted to do something different. He wanted a close-up shot of a baboon's anus.
Yes, that's right.
But he was overruled by the band.
I
So
think that, yeah, I think that's,
they had others other than with Adam Hart Mother, where they really just said do your own thing. They had a concept they wanted an ear underwater, so that's what they got. Uh,
yeah, again, Dave, real quickly, that, while this is return to a bit more avant-garde, a bit more almost quasi-psychedelic in terms of the image, the songwriting on this particular album is, there's a definite turn here. And actually, I think for people who were not really Floyd aficionados, Metal was the first album that you could really easily sort of walk into. More concise songs, more, I think, traditional structure, and I actually think more listenable. And so for my money, this is one of the best albums Floyd ever did, even though the artwork is, I think to some degree off-putting.
wait a second. One of the best they ever did in their early career or ever?
This is right up there for me. This is right up there.
Really? Okay.
This is, I think
Interesting.
this is superior. This is a superior album, and I think and I think it bears listening, careful listening. This is, for me, this is the real transition album for Floyd. Again, this is, and so one of the things that just made this so odd was that, from my perspective, this was just another weird Floyd album because of the cover. I reacted negatively to the cover. I remember this as a kid, but later listening to it, it's fantastic. It's really
Well, I think Wright said that it was his favorite album.
yes. It's
So
extraordinary. I
so
think it's really good.
and clearly a lot of critics really liked it. I don't think that there's for my taste, the first good or excellent Pink Floyd album, the first listenable Pink Floyd album was Dark Side of the Moon.
Well, I would differ a little bit, but yeah.
Just about the cover now,
Yeah.
noting that Hipgnosis didn't like it. Said it was his least favorite Pink Floyd album sleeve. He said, quote, I think Metal is a much better album than its cover.
Yes, it
End
is.
quote. And Aubrey Powell said, Metal was a mess. I hated that cover. I don't think we did them justice with that at all. It's half-hearted. So
Wow, that's hard to argue.
they agree with you. The cover isn't as good as the album. It's a strange cover in any case.
Strange. It's very strange. Good album, bad cover. It's interesting though. Real quickly, that so you've got Hipgnosis, and they're obviously involved with lots of groups, but they're very closely linked with Floyd. But they have this kind of artistic license to kind of go in whatever kind of direction they want, and they're obviously just pushing the envelope in lots of areas, using lots of different photographic techniques, for example. And it's just interesting that Floyd is so receptive to their interesting directions, their unique directions, that really it's hard to imagine a band just having the different kinds of album covers the way that Floyd did. I mean, there's just so many different directions. There's just so much there that is kind of difficult to put your finger on, which maybe was part of the point. But this is Hipgnosis, and Floyd started to hit their stride. In early 70s, this is the golden era for both.
Well, and again, Hipgnosis wasn't particularly happy with the result of this little experiment, and I personally think the baboon's anus might have been more interesting, but
It'd have been more interesting.
one of the things about the relationship between Pink Floyd and Hipgnosis was there was just a lot of give and take, and
Yes, right.
sometimes you'll have the case where they just say, "Go do your thing," and sometimes they have some ideas that they'd like to see realized. So this was one of those cases, and I think most of us agree that it didn't work out very well. One last point about this. This is the last album with Waters, last album before A Momentary Lapse of Reason. that had a photograph of the band in the gatefold. So there's that. Next album, Obscured by Clouds. This is another soundtrack. It's a soundtrack for a movie that was the same director. I'm sorry, I don't have the name of the director right off the top of my head, but Obscured by Clouds was a soundtrack for the movie La Vallée, the Valley, I guess, and there was some arguments with the producers of the movie, and so Pink Floyd just released this and had Hipgnosis do the cover.
Yeah.
And released it as Obscured by Clouds, which led them to actually, when the movie came out, it was La Valley, and then in parentheses, Obscured by Clouds.
Yeah, I want to sell some tickets. Yeah.
Yeah. And the cover consists of a man sitting in a tree, and it's been taken so out of focus to the point that it's completely distorted. And you have to know what it is to be able to even see where that could possibly have been a man
Right.
at some point.
Yeah.
Hipgnosis viewed a number of stills from the film on a 35 millimeter projector and kind of liked the visual effect when the slide jammed. So that they kind of tried to work that into the cover.
Oh my God. Yeah. It's to me, it's just the, it doesn't work particularly well. I don't know how much to say about it. It's, I think there's an attempt to sort of bail themselves out here on the back cover, maybe a bit more, introducing a bit more sort of traditional in terms of imagery. But yeah, it's Hipgnosis. Again, here's a clear example, though, of Hipgnosis being able to sort of do what they want, a kind of happy accident, and the band more or less acquiesces. It's like, oh, sure.
Well, the director of the movie said, "Oh, well, they made no effort to make a decent cover because they knew that the Dark Side of the Moon was coming up, so they wanted to save the good stuff for that." But Thorkerson said, "This album was given as much consideration, we put as much work into it as any of the other ones."
Oh, I believe that. No, I believe that. Yeah. It's real quickly. It's interesting. The Floyd was in. They weren't a quartet for only maybe a decade, maybe decade plus. They were involved in a number of soundtracks. I'm not quite sure why that was. They're involved in at least 3 soundtracks that I'm aware of.
They did some work on Zabriskie Point.
Zabriskie Point, yes, that they're film I'm thinking of. I'm not quite sure why. I don't know how that all happened. It would just seem to me, though, as famously dyspeptic as Roger Waters was, the idea of sort of collaborating with a director, sort of somehow bowing to a director's vision on some level, it just seems like this is not something the group would do. But yes, they were involved in a number of soundtrack projects, including, of course, one of their own films, the film in Pompeii.
Oh, yeah. Yes. Live in Pompeii, right.
Live in Pompeii, yeah.
Okay, so they did a number of soundtracks. 2 of them had Hipgnosis covers. We've talked about them.
Right.
And now we come to the first, I think, truly iconic, not the first interesting Hipgnosis cover for Pink Floyd, but the first truly iconic
I think that's fair.
cover, and that's The Dark Side of the Moon.
Yeah.
In the early discussion of this, leading up to this, Pink Floyd did not have any concept of what they wanted, except just enough of that squirrely, distorted psychedelic stuff. Let's get something clean and classic this time. This was again, I think,
Right.
Wright who said let's let's finally have a really classic album cover. And so they came up with this. Aubrey Powell said he was looking through a physics book with Thorgerson, and they saw this picture of a prism breaking the light, and said that's it.
That's it.
So that's what they went with. Hipgnosis had a number of freelance photographers and artists working with them, and at some point, this was. Let's see. By they had the actual of this design because they didn't know how to do it.
Right.
By George Hardy, which was one of their freelance associates.
That's right.
So they did this, and Hipgnosis offered the band a choice of 7 designs, of which this was one. But all 4 members agreed, oh, that's it, the prism. Yes, that's what we want. And Powell said Thorgerson was a little bit upset, that all these other wonderful designs were just not even considered, but in a way, in a lot of ways, it kind of represents the band. For one thing, you think about a band who's so associated with light shows. This kind of reflects that. It also, of course, reflects the album's lyrics and idea, and it fulfills Wright's request for a simple and bold design. So these things all came together.
It's the most iconic album cover maybe of all time. This is, I think, you look at any poll, you look at any critical review of albums, and this is always right up there. And it's
always up, yeah.
This obviously became the defining kind of image for Floyd itself. And you think about the marketing that came from this design, the millions of posters and T-shirts. And
licensing, oh man, yeah.
It's extraordinary. And again, 50 years later, almost 50 years later, I mean, Dark Side remains, I think, it's the crowning achievement for the band. And this is the crowning achievement for Hipgnosis. I mean, Hipgnosis did a lot of different things, but I'm not sure that they ever came up with anything better than this. This is extraordinary, and the simplicity, the starkness, the spareness. I think it's quite evocative, and in a way, it does seem to sort of capture the band in a very interesting sort of way. Now, and there's another album cover that I like more, which we'll talk about in a second, but this is powerful stuff. This is incredible stuff, and so thumbing through album bins, right, in the 70s, you'd come across this image on this album, and it just was, you're transfixed by it. I mean, even if you had seen it a dozen times, you always just took some time just to pick it up and to look at it even more closely. There's just something about this that is just powerful. And this is
and you have to wonder to what extent the cover drove sales.
Yes, in this case, absolutely.
And this is one of the best-selling albums of all time. I think it holds a record for being on the Billboard albums lists for longest over 900 weeks.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's year after year after year after year. It was one of the best-selling in the top 200, and it's and it remains. It's funny. When I work with young people, and we showed this. I think maybe you were in the class with me, Dave. We showed this image to young people, and they immediately knew what it was. They couldn't tell you a Pink Floyd song, but Floyd, Dark Side, yeah. I mean, it meant something to them. And there's something about this image that has carried them through the decades. This is it.
So, it's deceptively simple, but amazingly effective.
which has got to be a metaphor in that someplace, right? You know,
Right.
I mean, but you know,
Yeah.
it's interesting. But when you mentioned that the idea that this is, you know, this cover may have in fact driven sales to some degree, you know, people, what is that? That's amazing. I wonder what this thing sounds like, you know, because so many of the Floyd covers up to this point, I mean, I think discouraged sales on some level. They were off, I think on some level off-putting, you know, Adam Hart Mother quite famously. And so, you know, in a way they flip it a little bit. They go 180. This cover, this didn't hurt sales by any stretch. It definitely
Right. Well, okay. The incredible success of this was really the international breakthrough
That's right.
for Pink Floyd.
100%.
Got them a much larger audience than they had ever had before. And on the strength of that, the record company reissued their first two albums, The Piperettes, The Gates of Dawn,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
Secrets. They reissued that as A Nice Pair. And Hipgnosis did the cover for this double album reissue as well, and engaged their love of pun,
Yeah, here we go.
not necessarily.
This, yeah, you know, we'll take a look at it here. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, right there at the top middle.
This is, I mean, Hipgnosis, as we will talk about in another episode, they did like the pun. They were obviously in love with the female anatomy. Sometimes a little bit too. Sometimes their albums are a little bit too on the nose for me.
Yeah,
This is from what
this is one of those times.
this is soft. This is sophomoric, but this is
Yeah.
also Hipgnosis. I mean, this is the world that Hipgnosis, you know, they were a part of this as well. And so, as avant-garde and as challenging as some of their album covers were, some of them could be, again, pretty, you know, juvenile. And I think this is
Well,
in that direction.
and I think Thorgerson would claim that this was actually even close to being a Magritte quotation. That the hand is very Magritte, and the pair. This is not a pair, you know, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Okay.
So
I think you would. Yes.
it's sophomoric. You're right. But this is another Hipgnosis album cover for Pink Floyd.
It is, and just again, this is not. This is the world that Hipgnosis, you know, tread in, and many of their album covers really kind of lean in this direction with other groups. I mean, Hipgnosis worked with dozens of other groups in the 1970s, and it was not unusual to see these kinds of album covers coming out of their artistic collective, and so not that unusual.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about that on our next episode with Hipgnosis, because Hipgnosis was everywhere in the 70s.
That's right.
And anybody who was anybody in the music scene had Hipgnosis doing their artwork. But maybe the most amazing thing about A Nice Pair is that it was bookended by two really amazing covers. Not sophomoric or anything like that, but really amazing covers. On one hand, we had Dark Side of the Moon, and then it was followed by Wish You Were Here.
Yeah. The Wish You Were Here album. Well, I guess, you know, there's the amazing story, right, in recording Wish You Were Here, where Sid Barrett comes into the studio, an unrecognizable Sid Barrett comes into the studio, visits the studio. And the band members are, well, not everybody knows who the hell he is. He's only there for a few moments and then kind of wanders away and in any way kind of disappears. And so there's a certain kind of melancholy that is associated with the recording of this album. But on the other hand, this image is indelible. This is we think about the 1970s. This is just one of the things that comes to mind. The "Wish You Were Here" LP, and so there's a pretty good story here of the actual filming or the photograph episode here.
There's a quote by Powell that describes the actual. All right, just even before that, back then when they were making these covers, there was no Photoshop software, not even the sort of computers that would be able to
That's right. No, it wasn't
Photoshop at that point. So all of this stuff was real. They would do some manipulation of these photographs in the studio and so on, but the sort of thing that could be done with Photoshop in 15 minutes would take hours and hours or days.
That's right.
With manual manipulation. You'd be cutting stuff out, you'd be pasting it, and that would all be manual. You working with real photographs.
Yes.
That led to Hipgnosis flying all over the world for, in some cases, for some very strange and very unusual photographs. But
right.
If you can only get a picture of a sheep on a couch in front of a Hawaiian wave in Hawaii, that's where you're going to go.
That's where you go. Right.
Right. So this quote about this picture. So I flew to Los Angeles and found this guy, Ronnie Rondell, who was a stuntman. He agreed to be set on fire a number of times. So we did it on the back lot of Warner's in Burbank. As you can imagine, it's a very unpleasant experience being set on fire, and it's very dangerous because you're standing still. Normally with a fire shot, somebody's moving. They're running away from your face. But we were lucky that afternoon. There was no wind. I shot it 14 times. On the 15th time, a gust of wind caught up and blew the fire straight into his face. Immediately, his team jumped on him, sprayed him with extinguishing foam, and saved his life. He just got up from that and said, "That's it. I'm never doing this again." But I had it in the can.
Yeah, it's amazing. Again, as you're suggesting, in the era of Photoshop, this kind of thing is accomplished, I think, rather easily. But back in the day, this was real fire, a real guy, real handshake, the whole deal, and a fair amount of travail. But it's a powerful image, right? And again, it's there's a thematic quality to it that I think is particularly evident in some of the Floyd's 70s covers. And you want to talk a little bit about the burn? So you can see on the margin here, there's a kind of burn. And
yeah, Powell said that was Thorgerson's idea. He wasn't really wild about the idea of that burn on the fringe, but he said it was his idea, and we're a team, so we did it, and a lot of people really like it. So he said, so it worked out. The burn here, the picture itself, you have two businessmen with a handshake, and one of them is getting burned. Okay, again, the love of the pun.
Oh, yeah.
So you actually have this getting burned in a proverbial sense than being translated into a literal sense.
Yeah, and this is okay. And so it is that reason that this is not really it's a little too on the nose for me once again. I mean, it's an amazing picture. It's an extraordinary album, But
it is that, and again, this is a very iconic album. People know this picture. Everybody knows the picture. Even the people that don't know the album know the picture.
Right. That's right. Absolutely.
But again, Powell said the photograph that he loved even more than the cover was the one that was on the inside cover, um, of a diver
Oh, yeah.
in Lake Mono in Northern California.
Right.
And you know the one I'm talking about.
I do. Yeah.
There were
That's
these incredible stalactites, stalagmites, all that stuff sticking out of the lake, and then a diver, um, but
really.
there's not a single ripple in the water. And again, this is not Photoshop. This is photographed.
This is
It's
it. Yeah, it happened.
um,
Yeah.
he said it had been windy all day, but when the diver went into position, the wind dropped, the lake went flat. It was a beautiful, calm evening, and I got the shot. And this is the idea. Wish you were here. There's an absence. There's a certain absence of something that you would expect or something that you would want. In this case, the ripples that come from diving into water, right? But that reflects the theme of something missing, something absent, that's found in the album.
That's right. And so in this way, um, hypnosis and the band are in concert with each other. I think that sometimes that I think it the thematic overlap is, I think, oftentimes a happy accident. But as the Floyd and these album covers became more famous and more complex, people began to look at them much more closely and to, if you will, kind of read them for meaning. And so this is happening, and this is a big part of the Floyd's appeal, is that these challenging album covers provide insight into not only the music of the Floyd, but also life in general, this kind of thing. And so, yeah, becoming extremely important in the culture.
Yeah. Okay, and that brings us. That was our penultimate Hipgnosis Pink Floyd cover. And when I'm talking about Hipgnosis and Pink Floyd, again, Thorgerson went on to work with Pink Floyd with the David Gilmour um,
Yeah,
incarnation of the group. But this is the penultimate one where he's actually working with the group that had Roger Waters as at least the nominal head, and creative force. The last one was Animals.
here we go. Yeah, this is it.
And Thorgerson offered three ideas for this one. And one of them was um, a small child, teddy bear in hand, entering his parents' bedroom uh, to find them copulating wildly like animals.
There we go. Yeah.
All right. But Waters had a fairly specific idea here. And he lived near um, the Battersea Power Station. And he just loved that bit of architecture. It was, at that point, it was narrow and approaching the end of its productive
Yeah, it
life
was. Yeah, it was.
as a
I mean, the
power
concept, yeah,
station,
being deactivated, right?
right? But it had already been used in all sorts of pop and rock
That's right.
art. It had been it had appeared in Help
Yep,
in the
it
movie.
does.
8 years later, The Who
Yep.
included a photograph of it in a booklet to accompany Quadrophenia. Um, Junior's Eyes, the freak rockers who backed David Bowie on Space Oddity, called their only album Battersea Power Station. In 1971, Slade recorded a promo for their single Get Down and Get With It on Battersea's roof. So when they made the request to use the power station as a backdrop, by that point it was nothing unusual for the management to include it in that sort of thing. So they said yes.
Yeah. It's an amazing building, right? It's one of the world's largest structures made of brick. It had been around for decades, and in fact, built before World War II, right? And so, like the German Luftwaffe would use this as a kind of navigation point. It amazingly survived the war. Much of London didn't, but this thing actually survived the war. And as you're suggesting, Dave, it was in the process of being decommissioned as a power plant, but it had this iconic status, and so it makes for a very, I think, extraordinarily powerful image on this album. But then you've got this floating pig, and so
Just one more thing about the power plant itself. The reason Waters was so drawn to that is, like I said, he liked the architecture. He liked the four phallic towers.
oh yeah,
The idea of power that's expressed in the entire building.
right.
He also sees it as kind of an expression of the group. There were four legs of the group, but those legs are up in the air like a dead animal. It's not going anywhere. How much of that was a retrospective interpretation? It's hard to say,
Well, who knows? But yeah,
but that was all going on.
Isn't it generous of Waters to suggest that the band had four legs?
Yes, it really is.
Because certainly what, yeah.
There's a lot of evidence that he didn't really see it that way.
That's for sure. But it's an amazing site. And but so it's selected that the Battersea is going to be part of this artistic project, but it wasn't just the building, right? It wasn't just the environs. There were other ideas at work here in terms of what might be included in this event.
Yeah, and so they ordered a large inflatable pig to be to be floated over land, and they had experimented with inflatables before. They had a giant octopus floated on a lake in 1971. And that had been made by the Australian artist Jeffrey Shaw and his colleague from the Netherlands, Theo Bootschijver. If I'm pronouncing that right, I don't know. But Bootschijver made this pig. He was the one that was commissioned with making this pig, and one of his biggest problems was designing a pig like that did not look like a friendly Disney pig.
Right.
He said clearly the pigs that they wanted here, they were Stalinistic pigs. They were mean little piggy-eyed.
That's right.
Porkers, right? And so he needed something more aggressive, and it took a while for him to get what they want. But once he got the design, he went to Ballonfabrik, a German company that had actually made Zeppelins in the past, and asked them to create it. It had this sneery, wrinkled snout, two fearsome tusks pointing out the downturned mouth. It looked very threatening. So
and it is enormous.
55 feet long. So and it has to be to not get lost between the towers.
No, that's exactly right. Yeah, I mean, it has to be right. Yeah, absolutely.
But they made it with like a cotton, thin rubberized cotton, and so it was huge. But the company said, this is an awful, ugly pig. Is this we don't want to make this. He said, this is what I want, and so they made it. They made this pig, and the shooting was scheduled for Thursday, December 2nd, 1976, and they had like a dozen photographers there. They had a sharpshooter to shoot the pig if it got away. Anyway, it was all ready, and then they couldn't get the thing inflated. It was a cold day. Helium shrinks when it's cold, things like that. So they got the thing half inflated and decided they would have to come back the next day. Did get some nice shots of the station, of a beautiful sky, all that sort of thing. But they had to come back for the shot of the pig. On the second day, they got the pig inflated, and it was on a winch from a truck. And one of the photographers wanted it to be a little bit higher, so the truck operator let out the winch, or let out the line on the winch, and then just stopped it. And that sudden break caused the ring that was holding it go ping, and the pig was free.
So
Pigs on the wing.
pigs
And
on the wing.
He was free,
God.
and everybody panicked. They got in the helicopter and went to chase it. It was gone. They couldn't find it anymore. Pink Floyd crowded into their car and took off laughing. They thought it was hilarious, but they got out of there. The designer said, "All right." He went and found the ring. He said, "Yes, it's my design, but the Germans made it." And there's a quote by Powell. Storm and I hustled off to our studio in Denmark Street, where we immediately put it out on the radio that anybody who saw this pig should get in touch. Airline pilots were reporting seeing it at 30,000 feet. It was a real danger. They had to shut down Heathrow.
Yes.
If it happened today, I'd be in prison.
Yeah, that's right.
They have sent up fighter jets to try and shoot it down.
Yep.
I was freaking out. I thought I'd be responsible for an airliner crash. Okay, the fighter jets didn't find it. It ended up being found by a farmer who was very upset because it had scared his cows.
Yes. Well, it's all some odd way. Of course,
the
farmer would find it. Yeah.
Yeah.
In my pasture. Yeah, of course.
So they went and got it. There were no crashes or anything like that, but a number of people were very, very concerned for a long time.
It's the best. That's the best story ever. It's the best story ever. The floating.
That was the second day. The third day they got the shot, but it actually ended up being a collage of the first day power station and the third day pig. Blah blah blah. But yeah, it's a fantastic story, and a story that this story doesn't happen in the day of Photoshop. It never will. This sort of thing will never happen again because it's too easy to do it on computer now.
No, it won't. It does though make for really an incredible. It's an incredible album, and an incredible cover, and and the pig then kind of lived on, and Waters. There's this long time dispute between the rest of the band and Waters over licensing of the pig, and all of this, but it's so clever, and as you're suggesting, this could never happen today in the world of Photoshop. That you had to float a 55 pig to make this happen. It's just amazing,
Yeah. So in a way, it's a very fitting end to the collaboration between Pink Floyd and Hipgnosis. Fantastic story, fantastic cover, and after that there was a falling out. Roger Waters was upset because Thorgerson had used some of the album covers in his Walk Away Renee exhibition.
Right.
And I think this probably he didn't actually have the right to do that, but Waters was upset, and that was the end of the
That was the end of that.
collaboration.
Yeah,
Yeah.
collaboration. It's interesting. This is also a time when Waters is severing ties with almost everyone around him creatively, and
Yes,
it's hard to know
that
really
was.
what triggered all of this. But yeah, Rogers just was pissed at the world here in this era, and so yeah, that
Animals was 77. The Wall came out in 1979, and by that point, the relationship had already been ended. And 1979, the Wall, the final cut, 1983, and that was
yeah,
the last. That was the last Pink Floyd album that Waters was involved in.
that's right, that's right. Yeah. So we've got this amazing kind of linkage between a couple of artists, a kind of artist collective, and this band, that the ties go back to childhood, and it is clear that they kind of grow together, and they very much is a kind of symbiotic. I mean, they both kind of need each other in a way, and they both really prosper from the success of the other. It is, I think it's unprecedented, really, in this regard. It's really
Yeah,
something.
it is. It really is incredible. The degree to which their careers ran parallel. And I said the final cut came out in 1983. That's the year that Hipgnosis dissolved as
That's right.
a graphic studio. They did
That's
go
right.
on to make some um, music videos
Yes, it did.
with the Greenback, I think, was
Yeah,
the new company.
that's right.
But Hipgnosis was over. So really, all in terms of the time frame as well. Pink Floyd with Roger Waters dissolves in 1983 or
Yeah,
1985 anyway. But this final cut was the last album, and Hipgnosis dissolves the same year. It's an incredible parallel development, and as you say,
that's right.
hard to find its like anywhere else.
So absolutely, I think that's spot on. So where do we go from here, Dave? When we talk about hypnosis, what else is there to talk about?
Well, okay. As I said, we're going to be talking about all sorts of different artists, all sorts of different graphic designers in this series. But our second episode is going to also be looking at hypnosis because hypnosis was so omnipresent in the 70s
Yeah,
and worked for everything, everybody that had a name or was trying to make a name.
absolutely.
Primarily groups like Genesis and then Peter Gabriel's solo. Led Zeppelin was used hypnosis extensively.
That's right.
Paul McCartney did a lot as well. So we will talk in our next episode about some of these other major connections and maybe a few of the minor ones as well.
Yeah,
But we'll definitely want to talk about some of the other iconic covers that Hipgnosis was involved with, and they are not few.
absolutely. And so with that, Dave, can you tell everybody where to subscribe and take us home?
Absolutely. If you want to see more of Steve and Dave's productions, you can subscribe right here. We highly recommend it. You can see some of our other videos here, and our playlist for this week can be found right here.
All right. So we'll see you next time.
See you then. Bye bye.